Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello guys, my name is Alya Nabila and I'm a moderator from group 3. In this video, we will presenting about approach, technique and method from teaching English as a foreign language subject. Here is the member from group 3. The first one is Rizky Fadhillah, number 2 is Hasna Fadhila Rasyidah, number 3 is Ahmad Farhan, number 4 is Alya Nabila, and the last is Lusi Munalisa. So for the first presentator, the time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Hasna Fadhila Rasyidah, and in here I would like to present about GTM or Grammar Translation Method. What is GTM? Grammar Translation Method, that is also called classical method, is a method of teaching English that uses translation of the implementation. The main characteristic of this method is that this method focuses on learning the role of the grammar, sentence structure, and the implementation of within translation passage from one language to another language. That's why the GTM is sometimes called the reading approach in some literature. This method are commonly used in teaching Greek and Latin from the beginning of the 16th century in Europe. In 1840s to 1940s, this method was applied for teaching foreign language in general. GTM, as its name, is primarily based on teaching grammar and vocabulary. The characteristic of GTM. Number 1 is classes are taught in the first language or in the mother tongue with little active use of the target language. Number 2 is much of the vocabulary is in the form of list is isolated word. Number 3 is often the only drills are exercised in translating disconnected sentence from the target language into the mother tongue. Number 4 is grammar provide the rules for putting words together, and instruction often focus on the form and the inflection for words. Number 5, reading of difficult classical texts in the beginning of the class. And the last is little attention is paid to the content of texts which are treated as exercise in grammatical analysis. And in what context GTM is applicable is GTM is to enable students to read and translate literature written in the search language, and to further student general intellectual development. And number 2 is to develop student reading ability to a level where they can read literature in the target language. And the next topic is the advantage and the drawback. The advantage of GTM is this method is suitable for students of a level and is particularly effective in the classroom with a large number of students. Number 2 is the high effectiveness of grammatical and vocabulary learning. Number 3 is the grammar translation method. The grammar translation method can be regarded as the best method to instruct grammar and vocabulary, as teacher can exactly know whether their student master the grammatical structure by examining the result of grammar drills and correct student mistake immediately. And the last one is grammar translation method has the advantage for language teaching, has learning, especially in terms of accuracy. Learning English accurately is very important, especially for reading, because it can help the student to understand the construct of sentence in the text. And the disadvantage of GTM. According to Larson, Freeman, and Anderson in 2012, the biggest weakness of GTM, which refers to the fact that learners only focus on cramming grammatical rules and vocabulary accumulation and ignore the cultivation of their communicative competence. And according to Natsir 2014, lies in the fact that the interaction in classroom is mostly from teacher to student, without much student initiation and peer interaction. And number 3 is this kind of method is assumed that it can make the student bored in the classroom. And another disadvantage of GTM are it means that GTM can create the domination of the teacher in the classroom. In other words, the class activity will more focus on the role of the language structure than practice the role itself. And the last one is, in addition, GTM cannot develop the student communicative competence because they cannot use the role of the language structure flexibility to communicate. And the conclusion of GTM is, based on the explanation above, we can see that grammar translation method is a method that can make the student bored. However, when it is modified, the student can acquire the grammar competence in enjoyable classroom without facing boring situation. The English course that the researcher will describe has tried to implement the modified. I think that's all for me. And the next material will be delivered from my friend. Thank you.
The next is audiolingual method. What is audiolingual method? This method became very popular in the 1960s and was based on the behaviors theory of learning. It held that language learning is a kind of behavior similar to other types of human activity. Unlike the GTM and the DM, the audiolingual method or situational language teaching was firmly based on the theoretical background. According to Brown 1974, the ALM is firmly grounded on linguistic and psychological theory. In 1840s to 1940s, this method was applied for teaching for foreign language in general. GTM, as its name, is primarily based on teaching grammar and vocabulary. Okay, next is the characteristic of audiolingual method. Characteristics number 1 is the new material is present in dialogue form. Number 2, there is dependence of mimicry, memorization of set phrase, and overlearning. Number 3, structure a sequence by means of constructive analysis and thought one at a time. Number 4, structural patterns are taught using repetitive drill. Number 5, there is little or not grammatical explanation. Grammar is taught by inductive analogy rather by deductive explanation. Number 6, vocabulary is strictly limited and learning in context. And number 7, there is much use of types, language labs, and visual aids. Number 8, great important is stage to pronunciation. Number 9, very little use of the mother tongues by teacher is permitted. And the last is number 10. Number 10 is successful responses are immediately reinforced. Okay, the last point is, in what context ALM is applicable? ALM audiolingual method. The instructor will present the correct model of a sentence and the student will have to repeat it. The teacher would then continue by presenting new words for the student to sample in some structure. In audiolingualism, there is no explicit grammar instruction. Everything is simply memorized in form. And the next topic is for my next friend.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Alya Putri Nabila. And here I want to tell about CLT. CLT, or Communicative Language Teaching, or the communicative approach, is an approach to language teaching that emphasizes interaction as both the means and the ultimate goal of study. And in what context CLT is applicable? Implementing CLT is to help the student indeed, especially in conducting discussion rather give than the presentation sessions. Applying CLT allows them to speak without worrying in making mistakes. Difficulty implementing CLT in classroom. CLT implementation EFL context finds many challenges which, according to Cheng 2011, include: A. Lack of teacher training. B. Is local culture of learning and teaching. C. Is language test. And the last is lack of teachers' access to policy making process. Characteristics and principles of communicative language teaching. There is 4 characteristics in CLT, and the first one is it aims to make learners to attain communicative competence, use language accurately and appropriately. Number 2 is the major focus while using CLT approach is on learners. Number 3 is the syllabus emphasizes the functional use of language. And the last is communicative activities enable the learners engage earners in communication. Yeah, that's all from CLT. And next,
let's move to TBLT, or task-based language teaching. Task-based language teaching, or TBLT, refers to the language teaching approach that claims the use of the task as the core unit of class planning and instruction. Jadi TBLT merupakan pembelajaran bahasa yang menggunakan tugas sebagai inti atau bagian dari pembelajaran tersebut. The example of the task in TBLT comprise making a phone call, solving a real-life problem, reading a map, or writing a letter. Jadi task dalam TBLT meliputi ini, making a phone call, solving a life problem, reading a map, or writing a letter. TBLT can provide enough input and output which are dispensable for language acquisition. Jadi TBLT tasknya itu dapat bermanfaat dalam penguasaan bahasa.
Okay, next about teaching procedure. Things should be prepared a teaching procedure. As the first is write out expectation, and then prepare visual, and then teach procedures, practice procedure, monitoring and assess, and the last is reteach. Okay, the first is write out expectation. For its procedure, student must know what to do and how to do it correctly. For teacher, must explicitly describe each step of the procedure. Some teachers choose an acronym to remind students of the most important element of the procedure. For example, the teacher could see the acronym BC to help when writing procedure expectation. The B is for bodies. How should the teacher be moving? Can they get up from their seat? And then the A is for assistance. How should the student ask for the teacher help? And the last, the C is for conversation. Are the students allowed to talk? If so, to whom? And then next, the second is prepare visuals. It is very helpful to create a visual to aid in the explanation of the procedure. One example of the visual is a looks like, sound like card. The poster listing the BCA expectation may also be created for each procedure or activity. The third is teach procedures. Using the prepare visual, take time to specifically teach each procedure or activity. Explain what the student should do, how they should move, how they should be taken to, and any other details they are expected to know. The fourth is practice procedures. In addition to the teacher's explanation, students need a chance to actually practice the procedures. For example, after the teaching student how to properly enter the classroom, have them line up outside the door and act as if they are just arriving. Students should be able to demonstrate the correct procedure. They also enjoy having fun with this process by showing the example and once master being able to perform the non-example. Next, about monitor and assess within the first few days after teaching and procedure. Be sure to monitor the student and assess how well they are meeting and procedural expectation. Implement a class-wide motivation system like fill in the blank, 100 squares, or marble jar to reinforce your procedure. The last is about reteach. After assessing the student performance of the procedure, it may be necessary to reteach the procedure or provide reminders as to how it should be executed properly.
That's all from our group. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for the attention and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.